Cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks, Kathryn, for coming and for working with this schedule. I'm Araminta, and along with Annie, we manage the Fintech Marketing Slack group and Hub. And today I'm chatting with Kathryn, MD at Copyhouse. And how this event will go is in the first 40 minutes, Kathryn and I will be chatting about B2B social media, or how to do social media as a B2B fintech company, and your own experience at Copyhouse, working with fintech companies and doing their social media, and what you've seen works and what doesn't work. And then afterwards, we'll be doing a Q&A. So everyone feel free to post questions in the chat and we'll get to them afterwards. And by the way, everyone, you will all receive a recording afterwards. So let's just get started. Kathryn, for those who don't know you, would you mind giving us a intro on who you are and a bit about Copyhouse as well?
Yeah, of course. So hi, everybody. Welcome. I am Kathryn Strachan, and I am the managing director and owner of Copyhouse. Copyhouse is a content marketing agency that specializes in the technology space. So we work across everything from health tech to fintech and insurtech. We cover the whole entire tech space. I've grown the company from just myself to a team of 30 people. So we've gotten quite big over a very short space of time. We were only started in April 2019. When it comes to what we do for clients, we do everything from content strategy, where we set, the content strategy, create their USPs, the customer avatars, and then we do content production. So content production being copywriting, content design, and social media. Social media is obviously what we're here to talk about today. Our social media approach is very B2B. So it's very LinkedIn focused and Twitter and personal brand building. And it's really about, helping. Most of our brands are making that first step onto social media. So, they either haven't been on it or they've only been on it in like the least active way possible. So our job is to get them active on some of these core fundamental platforms. And then once we do, moving them on to, additional platforms like potentially exploring TikTok or Reddit or, these additional forums that you might be part of once you get your social media up and running. But most of them are in the relatively early stages. We normally get involved with brands once they have a marketing manager in place. So are in the very early stages of expanding onto social.
So I'll just start from the beginning, which is in the B2B space, right? LinkedIn, it's a no-brainer. You want to be on LinkedIn, but does it make sense to be on other social platforms? Like when does it make sense to start investing in social media as a B2B fintech company?
Yeah, I think you should invest in it from the very beginning. It makes sense it takes time to build a personal brand and it takes time to build organic presence on social media. So, the earliest you can get it up and running, the better. I'm a big believer in choosing one platform and leveraging that. And then once you have that base, then expanding out. What I see a lot of companies do is they try to do like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn, and they try to do all of them all at once and end up not doing any of them particularly well. So I'm a big believer in, getting that up and running first. Focusing on one platform, your core platform, the platform where your audience mostly hangs out, and then moving on from there. So once you get it up and running, then thinking about what additional platforms you should do.
So would you say that first platform is LinkedIn then? Does that make sense? Would you say for most B2B?
Yeah, for most B2B brands, it depends on who you're trying to reach and who your audience is. One of the things we do when we first start working with a brand is we create a social media roadmap. So we spend a half day doing a social media workshop to pull out all the core insights, to identify the audience, to identify where the audience spends time, and then creating a roadmap for each of the pillars that they're going to be creating content around, that we're going to be creating content around for their social media profile. So part of that is identifying, who you're talking to. And the easiest thing is to go where they are. So, rather than being on a channel where they never spend any time whatsoever, which would be silly and fruitless, going to the platform that they're already hanging out on, that they're already spending time on. LinkedIn does tend to be, one of the most popular platforms for the B2B market. So it's normally a natural launch pad. But, depending on the audience, that obviously could change.
So let's just stick to LinkedIn then. Do you believe in company LinkedIn pages versus like personal branding link? Do you have a preference of which one to focus on? What does it depend on? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because the landscape's changing. So it used to always be that personal pages always perform better than company pages, but more weight is being given to company pages in the algorithm. So it is slightly starting to change. But personal pages still perform better, but you also don't want to just appear like a one-man band. So I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, you'd have a personal brand. You'd have somebody out there as a front leader, as a front runner. That person should be somebody who's going to be well positioned to connect with your target audience. So, if your target audience is CFOs, perhaps having your CFO have a personal brand, thinking strategically about who in the company it is. And yeah, also getting, the company page up and running, because ideally they should run parallel. One is about that individual and it's about, some of their core values. So, they might create content around entrepreneurship and innovation and these sorts of things. And the company page is obviously far more mid and bottom of funnel. So it's far more talking about, the actual product or service that the company does and is focused in that way. So, it makes sense to have them running parallel. Obviously, the personal brand might occasionally talk about the products and services, but, it shouldn't be all they talk about. You see that a lot where company leaders have personal brands, kind of. But what they actually do is they just repost all the content that their marketing team creates for the company page onto their page, and they're not actually saying anything new or different or unique. They're not even giving their opinion on, that blog the marketing team wrote or, the event that they're attending. They're not even using I statements. Some of the times they're just, reposting. And that's quite a big mistake that I see happening a lot. So I think it's about thinking strategically and probably doing a mixture of both.
And so if we were to focus on like the company LinkedIn pages, the types of posts, you said bottom middle of funnel. So is that, is that like product announcements, company, I don't know, new hires, that kind of stuff? What are some examples of LinkedIn posts?
For the company page, yeah. I mean, for the company page, it's also a really great place to talk about employer branding. So it's a really great place to talk about, your events and, the things that you're doing with your team and your values. And if you have a new hire or, any of these sorts of things, or if somebody within the company gets promoted, that's something that should definitely be shared, meet the team series. So there's a whole piece around employer branding there. There's obviously the product lean. So, focusing on the product as a service and creating content around that. There's also, a lean around thought leadership and like the thought leadership that your marketing team is creating that is coming out from like the wider company rather than like one individual. So there's also that as well. So, I mean, there's quite a lot of different things that you can do with a company LinkedIn page. I mean, with a personal LinkedIn page, it should be more personal, as the name suggests. So, you might talk about things that you are passionate about, like innovation or entrepreneurship or female leadership or, any of these sorts of things that really resonate with you and ideally also resonate with your target audience. So that's something that we use a workshop to determine, what those themes are so that we can create a structure and a framework that allows people to create content around those core themes.
Do you think it's worth, because I feel like a lot of company LinkedIn pages do that, right? Is it worth trying to be a bit different? Like, I don't know, I see company pages focus on, for example, I see like LinkedIn newsletters or they try and do different kinds of posts. Like, is it too risky? Or do you think it's worth trying to do something different when it comes to company pages?
I mean, it's always worth trying, but it's really about understanding your audience and, what your audience wants and needs. So, I mean, does your audience like newsletters? If so, maybe you should have a newsletter. I mean, it's really about understanding your audience and, what they want and need. And it should be really focused on that rather than like, let's just do this crazy thing just because we feel like doing this crazy thing. It should be based on insights that you have into the kinds of content that your audience likes and who you are as a brand, because you also don't want to do something that's like totally left field to who you are and who your values are and totally goes against what you are as a brand. So I mean, I'm always up for being creative and innovative, but it needs to come backed with insights and understanding, and it needs to come from that perspective rather than just from a here's a crazy idea perspective.
Yeah, fair enough. And so how do you measure success in a LinkedIn? Like, sure, there's likes and engagement. What metric would you say is the most important one if you're trying to measure how good you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I see it more as like part of a bigger picture. So I don't think that there's a one specific metric. I think it's a combination of all of them. So obviously you want to see engagement and you want to see people because that indicates that it's resonating with people, if they like and they comment, but there's also a whole large percentage of people that don't do either, who are just, kind of silent lurkers on platforms, aren't going to engage with it. So, looking at impression views, but also looking at more of the qualitative feedback. So, the feedback where people say, oh, I saw that post that you did the other day, or, oh, I saw that your company was talking about X, Y, Z, and like hearing this, and especially hearing it from people who are relevant to your organization. So people who are match, your audience, people who, you might want to work with, having them, know things about your company, know things about your senior leader who has a personal brand, having them have these insights is really great. So, I mean, it's a little bit of both. I mean, there's obviously the quantitative, the likes and the comments and the overall impressions, which measure some of the dark users, the people who don't like and comment, but also the qualitative, which looks at, what people are saying and if they're talking about you. Because, I mean, social media is kind of like word of mouth in a way, it's a way to get your brand out there and get people talking about it. And so you do want people to be paying attention to the content you create, and they may not like it and they may not comment enough, but they may also be sharing it behind the scenes. I mean, I know that I'm actually sometimes guilty of that, where I like see a post and I want to share it with our business developer, so I just send it to her in a message rather than liking or commenting on something. I've been trying to pull myself up on that actually, because I realize that I've become a dark user where I see something and it's maybe really relevant to one of my team members, so I send it to them via LinkedIn message, but I'm not actually commenting or liking. So there's a whole lot of people out there, most people aren't going to engage directly, but might be using it or might reference it or might talk about it or might, pay attention to it in a different way that is much harder to track and goes into the dark social category.
Mm-hmm. So imagine you're trying to do all the right things. You've done your research on what your customers want to read about, and you're focusing on middle or bottom of the funnel content, and then maybe you've also got a personal brand. You just don't seem to see the traction that you're hoping for, or maybe the leadership team is like, this LinkedIn thing is not working. You need to try something else. What do you think are some good steps to try and change things, maybe audit it? What are some common mistakes also that you see? What would you say to someone who's struggling?
Probably say to be patient, because normally you hear that when like it doesn't achieve results in like month one. So normally when like clients are like, oh, it's not working, it's like, I mean, it's been a month.
Yeah.
So normally it's because people aren't patient and don't understand how organic content works. So organic content, especially if you're starting from a standstill, so you're starting from ground one, it's going to take 6 months to really get up and running and really start producing those great results. I mean, I have a really strong personal brand. It's taken me 4 years to build it, to get it to where it is today. I've been working on it for 4 years. It's not something that is going to happen tomorrow. Like, your first post is not going to be like the best post you've ever done, because you don't understand your audience. And even if you like understand your algorithm, you don't know the type of content that's necessarily going to land. You can make smart, educated decisions about the type of content, but it's just an assumption until you kind of like send it out into the market. So I think like one of the biggest mistakes most brands make is they like way overthink social. Mm-hmm. So they think that every single post has to be 100% perfect and has to get this really great engagement, and so overthink it that they never even post anything. But actually, the algorithm, it needs to get to know you. Your audience needs to get to know you. It's like going to one networking event and saying networking doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it doesn't work when you only go to one. You need to go to many, you need to go to multiple, you need to show up consistently and regularly, and you need to do all these things to get the good results. So, it's about being consistent and sticking with it, and, not being quick to jump to assumptions. And I think most brands who say it doesn't work have only really done it for, a week or two. So I would say be patient, keep trying, notice what works and what doesn't. So, perhaps you do a post and that really knocks it out of the park. And perhaps it's about something that you didn't expect it to be about. Being willing to kind of try to experiment on some of these things and letting go of perfectionism. Not every post is going to perform incredibly well. I mean, I do posts on my personal brand that, like, one might get 100 likes and comments and get some really great engagement, and then I might do one that doesn't really get many at all. And not everyone is going to be perfect. There is, if you look at the professional sports world, there's no one player that wins every single game or hits every single ball out of the park. It's not possible. So give yourself a little bit of a break. Keep trying, keep monitoring, keep thinking about what works, what doesn't work. Try to be as authentic as possible. So, especially with a personal brand, think about some of the conversations that you're having in your, day-to-day life and create content around those. But yeah, really harness some of these things so that you can start to gain traction and give it time. It's going to take at least 6 months, but it's probably going to take a lot longer to really get it to where you want it to be. And, an agency can help and guide you, but, nobody has a magic answer that just makes it work from tomorrow. You need to do it consistently and regularly, and you will get that traction, you will get that momentum, and it will get better. So be patient.
It makes you, I totally agree. But it makes you wonder, if it's even worth having a strategy sometimes, because it's also often it's just all about experimentation, right? So if someone's starting from scratch, is it worth, having a really well laid out strategy when, in month 2, you realize everything that you thought you knew was completely wrong and you have to redo everything? Has that ever happened? And, what would you say? Yeah. Do you think it's worth really having a laid out strategy if you're starting from the beginning?
Yeah. Strategy is not a set in stone, that's it done, it's fixed forever kind of thing. A strategy should be a natural evolution. So the point of the strategy that we do at the beginning is to create a launch pad. So to create something to start creating content around, to create an understanding of the audience. But that's going to grow and develop as you get to know your audience, as you get to know what works, what doesn't. But, you have a much stronger starting pad than, trying to pull from thin air. It makes it much easier to create content as well if you have core pillars and core themes that you want to be known for, rather than if I just say to you, okay, create a social post. You're like, okay, on what? On anything. Okay, that's much harder than, saying, okay, today's Monday. Monday's all about entrepreneurship. What's been going on in your life that, is relevant to entrepreneurship, and creating a post around that. So, a strategy just makes your life easier, but isn't a set in stone, never going to change, 100% done. A strategy should be constantly evolved and thought about, and, acts more as a really strong launch pad than a, final destination. And as you grow and as you evolve, you add to it. So a strategy, quite often people think of strategies as something you create and then you put it in a drawer and, never look at it again. But actually it should be a living, growing, breathing organism. It's kind of like having explain it having a map of where you want to go. So that you want to go to London and you're driving from Edinburgh, but as you're driving down the road, all of a sudden the road's closed and there's a diversion. So then you look at the map and you go, okay, well, we need to go over there, and then once we go over there, we need to go over here, and that's going to bring us there. So you then create a new path, but because you have the bigger picture, because you know where you're going, so what you want to be known for, because you know these things, you can get yourself there. Where when you don't have a strategy, it's a bit like spinning your wheels in mud. You're trying all these things, and maybe you're getting some traction, but you don't really know what works, what doesn't work, and you don't have any destination. So you're just kind of aimlessly wandering around, hoping you get somewhere eventually.
Yeah, I think we're all familiar with that. I often like to say, visit the strategy once a month kind of thing. And maybe once it starts working every 3 months or something like that. I think having putting it in the diary, monthly review of the strategy is really helpful, because if not, it just ends up with an endless, this is not working, try this, then that, try this, and it just, I don't know, it never ends. Whereas having a specific, like actually following through on stuff and then revisiting is often a good, I don't know, process. What do you think? You agree?
Yeah, I mean, it does need to be looked at, and isn't just like a one and done. You know, it's something that needs to be constantly reviewed and monitored and thought about. And you'll get to a point where you definitely have your core pillars, and even when you have a strong strategy, something might happen in your life that makes you decide that you want to do something different. So for example, for myself, I used to have like Mondays as the day that I created content around entrepreneurship, but I want to do something quite different with our culture, and really take it to a really bold and revolutionary way, looking at the 4-day work week at the moment. But yeah, thinking about things like this. So I'm actually turning Monday into like my health and well-being day. So the day that I talk about things like brain health and avoiding burnout and all of these things that I think are really important to entrepreneurs, but are more from a cultural point of view. So you might even change your strategy because something has happened, that something has evolved. Perhaps a new emerging payment has come out, or perhaps a new regulation has come out, and you want to spend some time creating more content around that. So I mean, it can change as well, not because you're doing something wrong, but because something emerges that you want to be talking about.
You mentioned a bit the core pillars, and I think that's a really interesting concept. And obviously, we're not going to do the workshop on here or anything, but it'd be interesting to hear a little bit like what are the main things you're looking at, and what are the main things you'd ask companies to look at it within themselves, or what to focus on, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a bit of like an inward outward kind of exercise, because you need to look inwards to see what you're all about, whether that's personal branding or the brand. I mean, what makes you special or different from all the other brands out there? What makes you unique, and not just from a USP, our product is 10 times faster kind of thing, but like what actually makes you different, and what are your values, and what are the messages that you have to send out into the world. And then you have to look at the other side of the equation, which is, who are you sending those messages to, and what do they need to hear? What do they want to hear? What's important to them? What's not important to them? And then you kind of find this sweet spot in the middle that takes the internal and the external to create, these pillars that are important to you, but also resonate with your audience.
So we've been talking quite a lot about LinkedIn. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the other social platforms in the B2B fintech space. Where have you seen a really good use case for Twitter and Facebook, and I mean even Instagram or TikTok? Have you ever seen that work in B2B?
Yeah, I mean, I think TikTok's a really interesting one, because it's certainly emerging and is becoming a more popular platform for B2B. It can be a scarier platform to get up and running, because if you're not used to creating any social content, and all of a sudden somebody goes, I need you to create funny videos, or let's think of some funny video ideas, and you're so used to the more of the serious formal stuff, and you want to create thought leadership content, it can be a little bit left field, so it can be a more difficult one. But I think TikTok's particularly interesting, because there's quite a lot of really interesting use cases coming out of there and developing, and is definitely a space to watch, whether or not you jump straight into it or start a little bit more conservatively. It's definitely a space to watch. Facebook's a bit more difficult, because organic reach on Facebook is quite difficult. So it really does need to be done through the paid angle. Twitter is a strong case as well for fintechs, because it's more conversational. It's a little bit more engaging than LinkedIn. So most of our brands do LinkedIn as well as Twitter, and kind of do a combination of them. Instagram can be right if your audience is right and your product is right, because Instagram can be a difficult one for brands that have SaaS brands and brands that don't have a visually stunning product or, struggle to visually represent what they do, which can happen, especially in the more complicated sectors. And it's about whether or not your audience is on Instagram, because you don't just want to be creating content for Instagram when your audience isn't there. There's no point in that. So it's kind of thinking about whether or not the platform's right for you and whether or not it's right for your brand.
Yeah. And also I wanted to talk about repurposing, because I see a lot of companies, they create a piece of content, whether it's a video or an article, and then they try and repurpose that into, social media posts. Have you seen that work quite well? And, is there some kind of process that can make it a bit easier? Because often it can be a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, repurposing is really smart. I mean, so for example, if you're creating a podcast, capturing the video from it and snipping it down to, a couple-minute video snippet that you can then share on social is a really great thing, really easy thing to do and a really great thing to do. And quite often, if you're not repurposing, you're missing out on opportunities. So repurposing is, really intelligent way to get the most from the content you're creating, the bigger pieces of content like the podcast or the ebook or the long form thought leadership article, by repurposing it, you can help it get more traction, help it perform better, but also make sure that the time or the money spent investing in creating this big asset is shared, is you get the most value from the work that you've done. It's difficult process-wise because it depends on what type of asset you're talking about, but creating a campaign around it, so thinking about how you might launch that. It's normally around bigger pieces of content that you do this. So thinking about, how you might launch that podcast episode or how you might launch that ebook and all of the different elements and assets that you might create around that, and then planning that into your social strategy is normally the best way to go about it.
I think that the tricky thing that happens here is that often if you do too much of it, then it just ends up with nonstop like promotional posts. So like distribution, basically, you create one piece of content somewhere and then you just promote it everywhere else. And, we've all been, me included, do a lot of this. But how do you avoid, just your feed, your Twitter or your LinkedIn, like all your posts just end up being like, oh, we wrote a blog post. Here we go. We did a video, and it's just like constant promotion rather than proper, rather than like an actual different post. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, because a lot of brands just only do that. And I guess it's about getting the right balance between creating other content that is, not just resharing a link and is actually, talking about a topic or an idea, and content that is, repurposing of other types of content. So, you see brands that just do 5 posts a week of repurposing content, and that's obviously not ideal. But, if you're doing 5 posts a week and 2 of them are on repurposed content, or even 1 of them, the podcast or the ebook should have a longer shelf life than like just this week. So you don't need to share 5 posts about just that ebook this week. You can space it out. So do 1 a week for 5 weeks, rather than 5 in 1 week. Then, space it out, and, that gives you more value as well. So rather than just doing a campaign where like, oh, we launched it, okay, done. You can be talking about it over a series of months and, over a series of different ways. So, incorporating different elements as well. So, rather than just sharing the link with, the thumbnail image, creating a little like stat mini infographic that, you can share from it, or creating like a little mini video, or, doing lots of different types of posts, and also spacing it out. So, I would think of it in a structured way rather than like all at once, floodgates. Yeah,
and keep people like used to seeing your name rather than all in one go. So everyone who's here, feel free to add questions in the chat and we'll get to them. No one has added any yet, so feel free. I've got plenty, so we can just keep chatting, but feel free to post in the chat or in the Slack group. There's one question that I get quite a lot from fintechs, which is a lot of the content that you want to produce on LinkedIn or on different social media platforms is you want it to be like expert based. You want it to come, maybe more technical or talk about advanced topics. However, in order to do that, you need to get the expert to do to basically get the insights from them. Have you found a process that works well for that? Because I feel like just asking the salesperson or the payment expert to just post themselves is not very sustainable. Instead, you need some kind of process where the marketing person interviews the expert, that kind of thing. So have you seen like companies do this? Have you seen a process that works? Is this something that you would do as well? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, when we often, when we create personal brands for our clients, we take them over completely and just create the content for them. A lot of those insights come from the original workshop that we create, but then also from past content that they've maybe done or, podcasts they've recorded. So we look at, all the things that they've done in their past and pull that out, because quite often in a podcast, they might, not that you're resharing a podcast from years ago, but they may share an idea about how they think about emerging payments or, a regulation that's still valid today. So, I mean, there's quite a lot of evergreen content shared in podcasts that can then be captured and turned into, a post. So you can do a lot of it without having to do interviews with them, but then, speaking to them regularly as well. And, perhaps every other week, having a short mini 20-minute, 30-minute call with them. You can get a lot of content in 20, 30 minutes. And that should carry you through to the following week. And kind of stalking them and finding all the stuff from their past that you can use, but also talking to them regularly and making it easy for them as well. And it's all about the individual. So perhaps they like sharing voice notes, or perhaps, email is better for them. But it kind of all shakes out like that.
Christina has a question here that I'll just get to now, because I think it's probably one that a lot of people have, which is, what is the ideal cadence? And she says sometimes companies post with little engagement, which is what we were discussing earlier. Is the answer more and more? What is the answer? What is the ideal cadence? I guess there's two questions: ideal cadence and is more posting always the answer?
No, I mean, it's not just about quantity, it's also about quality. So you want to create content that is meaningful. I mean, just resharing like all of the company content is not a good idea, or only sharing on the company page about the blogs with, just sharing a link to the blog is not a good idea. I mean, you really want to think about creating content that's going to be meaningful. But of course, as well, social media platforms have algorithms. So you kind of have to play into the algorithm a bit and make sure that you're posting enough to get the traction on the algorithm from a scientific point of view, and are nurturing your audience. So, your audience doesn't, I mean, if you never post, or if you only post like once a week, the chances of somebody of your audience seeing that post are pretty slim. Because no social media platform works where they send out without one post to your whole entire first connections. They send it to some of them, and some of them see it, and if they engage, they spread it further. So you do have to think about the quantity from an algorithm and from an audience point of view, but it is about making those posts quality rather than just reposting a link.
What do you think of encouraging employees to reshare content? Like, basically, I can't remember what the technical word for it is, but like getting the company, like team members, to share on their own, like using their own LinkedIn, that kind of stuff. Is that something you'd encourage others to do?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a team that wants to get engaged in your social, that's a great thing to do. I would make sure that they have some training. So, we run training sessions to help teams understand how to best use LinkedIn. And that's a really good thing to do, because then you have everybody on the same page. And also creating social media guidelines, because your team needs to know what they can talk about and what they should not be talking about. And you don't want them to be talking about something they shouldn't be talking about. So you don't want them, posting really controversial statements about, I don't know, Roe versus Wade or Russia or any of these world events. I mean, that could be a PR disaster for your company. So creating these guidelines and setting the parameters around, okay, well, we're happy for you to talk about any of this, but we don't want you to talk about politics. We don't want you to talk about any emerging controversial events, creating kind of some roles of play. I mean, what can they do? What can they not do? Quite a lot of employees often feel confused about what they should talk about and what they shouldn't talk about, and therefore then just don't do anything at all, because it's kind of confusing. So what you need to do is you need to empower the team by training them up, but then also set some guidelines on what's okay, what's not okay, what you expect from them. And yeah, set that out there. And I mean, even if you don't really care if they engage with your company content, which, is a bit of a shame, because if you have, a 30-person team, then, if you had them all engaging, and not that they all would, but if you did, that would be, additional 30 likes or comments on every single post, which is great. But even if you don't care so much about that, at least having a framework so that if they want to post, they know what they can and what they can't post about. Because if you just leave it for open game, I mean, you can hardly be mad if they post about something you didn't want them to post about.
I like that. So have like maybe just a document with guidelines, and then maybe like have a Slack channel, something like that. That's like LinkedIn engagement. Yeah. That's pretty good. Charlie has a really good question here. Charlie, I don't know if are you still on? Would you mind unmuting and asking yourself? Then you can ask any follow-up, and if you're on.
Yeah, of course. So we have a B2B and B2C proposition essentially, and we're just sort of not struggling, but almost wondering what sort of to do on what platform, if that makes sense. So it doesn't seem alien to our customers if we're promoting something to another brand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, not all the content that you create needs to be the same. So, the content that you publish on more B2C channels, like say Instagram, can be quite different from the content that you post on a B2B platform like LinkedIn. So, think about LinkedIn as like the stuff that you would discuss with those B2B brands, because, the audience is going to be different. So the customer personas are going to be different. So the things that they want to hear and the things that they're going to resonate with are going to be different, and that's going to change. And that should influence the content that you create. So, if you think about it more as a conversation, so, if you're going to talk to somebody in the B2C audience and, you know what they're like, and, you know who they are, and, what they care about, that what you're going to say to them is going to be different than what you say to the B2B, because they're going to have different concerns. They're going to have different thoughts and different cares. And yes, I mean, creating different content for different platforms, you absolutely should be doing. I mean, there are some companies that just create the same exact content for like Twitter as they do LinkedIn. And, that's obviously not the best way to go about things.
Imagine you have like a B2B and a B2C proposition, and you like it's quite different. Like I know there's quite a few B2B fintechs where this is the case. Would you suggest having two separate LinkedIn pages, or does that just not make sense? Like or you stick to one?
I would think in most cases you probably don't need to, because the audience is going to be on LinkedIn. Your B2C audience is unlikely to, I mean, they might have a LinkedIn page, but they'll use it mostly for work. So when they're on that LinkedIn page, they'll be thinking about it more from like a B2B perspective than they will really be a B2C, because most of us don't spend our personal lives on a platform like LinkedIn. In your weekends or your off time, you're going to spend your time somewhere else. So your mindset kind of changes, even if you're the same person, depending on, what sort of platform you use. So, I mean, I don't think you need to have separate pages, because you should be able to accomplish the same thing with, the one page. I mean, you might make reference to your B2C angle, or you might take a slightly more informal approach if you can with your B2B content. So it may not be all straight and stiff. But I mean, I think you definitely want to keep one page, because I mean, the challenge as well is if you had two pages, then one person could see both pages and be confused about what one's real and what one's not.
And actually on that point, I know you're launching like services in Europe. What about, when you have a B2B proposition or even B2C that is in multiple languages or serving multiple countries? Like also at what point, I guess, do you decide to separate it out? Because I know like N26 has multiple, I can't remember if N26 does, but I know some companies do have multiple LinkedIn pages.
Yeah. I mean, because of the way the LinkedIn algorithm works, I'd probably recommend keeping things in English, because the LinkedIn algorithm doesn't allow you to control this is only going to go out to a French market. What it does is it sends it out to a random collection of your first connections. And then if they engage with it, it goes further. So so you don't have any control whether or not the person who sees it speaks that language. But most of the world speaks some form of English, so is more likely to understand the English content than if you create content in French and it goes out to a random selection of first connections from which, you have French and German and Russian and, all of these different languages, because you don't have control over who sees the content. And in order for the content to do well, you need it to be engaged with. I would probably just recommend creating content in English because that gives you the highest chances of the people who are seeing it and understanding the content and therefore engaging in it.
Nice. Great. Yeah, you've got great answers for everything. I know this firing at you. Gulnar has another great question. Well, I mean, we briefly touched on it before on Facebook, but if Gulnar, are you still here? Would you mind unmuting? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I'm here. We've talked a lot about LinkedIn, but from my experience on research, I have noticed like many fintech companies, they gave up on Facebook because even ideal post scheduling time doesn't work, hashtags doesn't work, and even you can have great number of followers, let's say like 1,000, and reach only 10 or 20, and engagement is one, someone clicked, and I don't really know how to in our business, how to improve Facebook and Instagram performance, and it's because there are lots of B2B customers on Instagram, on Facebook, who promote their products and services. So also we want to reach them, but organically it's almost impossible.
Yeah, I mean, organic reach on Facebook has been dead for quite a long time now. So, I mean, if you want to leverage Facebook, a really great way to leverage it is with paid campaigns, because Facebook actually, because it's so old, has been around for so long, has a really high quality of data. And the data that so it allows you to do super targeting that is not really possible on a platform like LinkedIn that isn't as, doesn't have the same level of data on you. So, I mean, I think if you're going to be looking at a platform like Facebook, you do need to think about paid and leveraging it for what it's good for, which is the in-depth data into people's lives and who they are, and, the hyper targeting that you can do with these paid campaigns. Because, I mean, it's just crazy what you can do with the data that's available on Facebook. And it's definitely not available on LinkedIn in the same way. I mean, when you do a paid campaign you can do a paid campaign on LinkedIn, and, it is far more costly, but the hyper targeting is not as precise as it is on a platform like Facebook.
Yeah, and I've heard like some B2B fintechs getting quite good results actually from Facebook ads, and their proposition is very B2B focused. You'd think that Facebook is more for a B2C audience, but they've got really good results. So it really shows you that it's worth experimenting with all channels really, and seeing making sure you're measuring everything, and then seeing where the ROI is biggest, right?
Yeah, well, and using each platform to its advantage. So, some platforms are going to be better at other things than other platforms. So, it's about using each platform to its advantage and really getting the best results from them.
Yeah, and that leads on to Walid's question. Walid, are you here? And would you mind unmuting and asking the question that you posted here?
Yeah, hi, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kathryn. Thanks for everyone for organizing this nice workshop or event. So my question here, do you think it's a good idea that we have a different type of content for each kind of channel? So for example, for LinkedIn, we educate customers about, different educational content, right? And then having TikTok talking about, people and culture, like employee branding. This type of separation, it would be working well, or it would be requiring some testing and experimentation for that part. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably going to have some themes that overlap. So, I mean, you probably still want to be talking about employer branding on LinkedIn. So I think you're going to have, you know, it shouldn't be one channel gets a certain theme and another channel gets a different one, because there's probably going to be some overlap there. Because your company is probably not that different that, you know, they can, you know, and you want some consistency. So you're not sending 7 different messages across 7 different platforms about who you are and what you do. So you want some sort of core elements that are consistent throughout, some core narrative threads that, you know, exist regardless. But of course, you know, the platform and, you know, the materials that you create, the types of content, so, you know, video versus text versus imagery is going to differ based on the platform. So, I mean, obviously TikTok is going to be videos and Instagram is going to be imagery, and, you know, LinkedIn is probably going to be a combination of both, and Twitter is probably going to be more of a short, snappy text. I mean, each platform has content that perform a type content that performs best on it. But in terms of core messaging and a narrative thread, you know, there's probably going to be some consistency, some things that carry through to platforms regardless of what platform you're on.
Yeah, graphics. Have you seen any specific, like either propositions or use cases where graphics worked very well, whether it's LinkedIn or I don't know if Twitter graphics really works, but
yeah, I mean, they definitely work well. I mean, and you do need a combination of text as well as graphics. So you definitely can't just like only do copy only posts. You know, you need the imagery, even for platforms like LinkedIn, which are far more thought leadership driven. So, I mean, and Twitter, you know, imagery on Twitter as well. So, but what you want to do is, rather than like taking, I see some brands do this, they like go on to Shutterstock or Unsplash and like download a stock image. You don't want to use those on social media, because social media is all about being authentic, and those images are not authentic because every marketer has seen them a million bajillion times. So what you want to do is create authentic content. So perhaps it's a custom, you know, image with a stat, or perhaps it's, you know, a photo shoot of your team and some personal photos from the office, or perhaps it's, you know, a selfie that you've taken at a conference. I mean, creating authentic personal content regardless of platform is a far better recipe than stealing somebody else's content or downloading it from a site like Unsplash or Shutterstock or something like this. So you definitely want visual elements, but you definitely want ones that are authentic and unique and different, and not the exact same stuff that everybody else is using.
Yeah. And on the topic of authentic, it's, I mean, you just said it yourself, like there's a lot of marketers on LinkedIn, right? And if you're a B2B fintech, you'll often be targeting like CFOs or CTOs. And yeah, how do you, I don't know, as marketers, we often fall into the trap of putting the marketing hat on, and maybe, you know, being too promotional. And we know like developers, for example, are allergic to that kind of content. So I don't know if you have any tips or anything that you've seen that works well when it comes to creating content that is authentic, but to the CFO, to the CTO that you're talking about, and maybe doesn't want to know about employer branding or, you know, all that other stuff that's more marketing focused. I don't know if that makes sense, that question, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, get that person in your company to feed into the marketing. So, you know, whether it's on your company account or building a personal brand around them, but like a CTO is always going to connect better with another CTO than they are a CMO. So, you know, pick their brain, you know, create content that they, you know, would think is interesting, because if they think it's interesting and they're CFO, you know, other CFOs are probably likely to think that it's also interesting. So, you know, get their opinions, you know, even perhaps create a personal brand around them, because they will probably already have people in their network, in their existing LinkedIn network, who are relevant to, who would be your customers, that have been completely left untapped. You know, who don't even know what company they work for now, or, you know, haven't talked to them in years, or any of these things. So, I mean, it's a really great way to do that. I mean, even when you go to conferences, adding people afterwards who you met there, who they met there, and keeping engaged with them that way. So I mean, most companies have these resources already. They just aren't being tapped into. So they already have a CTO or a CFO or a CEO, but they're not getting their feedback. They're not tapping into that.
Yes, that's definitely true, right? Like just go to your CFO and CTO and ask what they consume. I mean, apart from like stalking them, as you said, and how else can you, because we know like how hard it is often to get conversations or calls with, they're very busy often, right? So how have you seen works best to kind of get them to buy in to the idea of social? I mean, I know it's always a lot easier when they're already bought in, but imagine, you're a marketer and you want to really push LinkedIn, but you're struggling to get the calls, you're struggling to get people to talk to, like the CFO, the CTO. Have you seen anything that works to really get that buy-in and also that like tapping in, as you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because they do need to buy in, and normally when we get involved, they are bought in to a degree, because they normally like a CEO doesn't normally sign off on something even from marketing spend if it's not something that they that the CMO has kind of waged the battle for and has kind of convinced them is essential. And as an external agency, it does tend to be the internal people who have these really close relationships with these people whose job it is to kind of open the door, at least a little bit. So because internal stakeholder management is something that is better dealt with by somebody who is internal, like the CMO or the marketing manager, than it is somebody external. So it's not something that we as an agency normally, I mean, we obviously work with them, but normally it's not us that does the buying in for them, because it's that internal person. And that's why we tend to work only with companies that already have a marketing manager, a CMO, and it's really their job to manage those internal relationships and to get the buy-in from people who may otherwise be opposed to it, but they're far better positioned to do that. So, CMOs or marketing managers who are on the call, like, you're much better positioned to convince, your CTO or your CFO to get involved, because you know them, you have a relationship with them, you have gone to team events with them, all these things that like an external agency can't do. So, I mean, kind of on you.
I mean, I honestly think we need to do an episode of this. We've seen it come up again and again, which is like, how do I get buy-in from leadership? And it's difficult. It's difficult. You have to be good at selling, basically, and at convincing. Yeah. And we had an event with Richard Cook, the social media manager at Monzo, and at first he had to get the team to buy in. It was just because they were so they were open and they were willing to listen. But he had to, at the beginning, this is not now, but I think 4 years ago or whatever it was, or maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, he just had to keep going, keep trying, keep convincing them. And then also it's kind of a feedback loop. So if you can show results, then it's a lot easier to convince. And this is the feedback loop, which is a bit tricky. If they're already bought in, then it's a lot easier. But if they're not, then you have to show results. But often you can't show results without getting buy-in. So it's like a vicious circle. But we'll do an event on it, because it is really tricky but very interesting.
It is, yeah. It's really about talking to them at a level that they understand. So what is it that they're motivated by, and how can you show that to them? And get them to act. It's about influence, really.
We have one last question from Claudette. I don't know if you're still on, Claudette. Yes, you are. Would you mind unmuting and asking your question? Oh, yes, you're on.
Sure. Yeah, so my question revolves around if there's any preference on monitoring or measurement marketing technology tools, for example, like Hootsuite, or just in general thoughts on some like effective MarTech tools that help, social media management.
Yeah, I mean, Hootsuite's a great one and a very obvious one. I mean, even just from a scheduling point of view, makes your life a lot easier to have a tool like this, because you can get all the content. Normally you have to get it approved ahead of time, get it approved, and then do the posting. So having a tool like that, also having a tool that collects all the analytics in one place, because especially platforms like LinkedIn are notoriously difficult for seeing like the overview of the analytics. So, having a tool that collects all the analytics in one place, so that you can just go to one dashboard and see how all the LinkedIn posts perform, instead of looking at every single one individually. yeah, I mean, I would definitely choose a platform like that. It depends on what you already have and what you already use. You may find, when we first started launching our social media service, we found that, SEMrush, which is a tool that we actually use for SEO, but they have a social media suite to it. So we didn't necessarily need to invest in that tool right up front. So you may find that you already have a tool that has some of these capabilities, because a lot of tools do. But I would definitely recommend having a tool. It'll make your life a lot easier. And even like from a research point of view, so being able to identify what hashtags are working best and what's popular at the moment and what people are engaging with, and and integrating those insights into your strategy so that you have an even stronger launchpad.
Yeah, that makes sense. So my last question to you is, what are some examples of fintech companies that you've seen do a really good job on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Monzo's content. They're quite funny, and they tend to go back to people who comment on their posts and reply to them, and they do a good job in terms of community engagement and management, which I think is something that often gets neglected. Often, people just create the content and then they don't think about like engaging with the audience. They don't think about replying to the comments or, replying to people who post mentioning the brand or any of these things. And I think they do quite a good job at like sharing content across the company and capturing different elements of it. Revolut does pretty cool thing where they take like a quote from a subject matter expert within the company and create a little graphic that goes around that. And that's a really great thing to do because it shows some of their internal expertise. So no, there's definitely some great fintechs out there doing some cool things. I mean, one of my favorite brands, which is not a fintech, but is an insurtech, Dead Happy, does some really interesting content as well, because again, it has a really unique tone of voice and uses humor to make something that would be dry and dull and boring, like life insurance, interesting, and encourages the younger population who may not think about life insurance to engage. So they wouldn't necessarily be classed as a fintech, but I think their content's really interesting as well.
Do you have examples of like payment processors, like something really targeting CTOs and CFOs or accounting tools or something like that? I know it's a bit like on the spot, but if you know a company that you think does a really good job, it'd be interesting. Like, you know what I mean? Like companies that are much more focused on like, technical.
Yeah, I mean, Modular is a brand that we work with, and they create all the payment infrastructure, create all the payment rails for payment processing, and their CMO has a really strong personal brand that talks about innovation and leadership, and these things that resonate with other companies. So it's a really great way for targeting and talking about, because C-suite's much more likely to listen to C-suite than they are, a faceless brand or somebody who doesn't have any credibility or authority in the space. So that's a really great example. Yeah,
that's true. And yeah, you're right about what you're saying regarding C-suite. And that's why it's even more important to talk to your C-suite. If you're the marketing person, trying to pretend to be the C-suite, I can imagine it's just really difficult. You don't know what to say, right? And that's where it's even more important to have that feedback loop in place. I think that's the key. If you have that in place, then everything else is a lot easier. Plus you have content and all that. So, right. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much, Kathryn, for answering all our questions. I know there was a lot, but I hope to everyone who attended live, it was useful. Where can people find you online and Copy House, and where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, so follow me on LinkedIn. I create a lot of content, so you get to know more about me. I'm under Kathryn Strachan. I can put the link in the comments. Also check out our website, coffeehouse.io. And yeah, drop us a line.
Awesome. And yes, Kaysan, to answer your question, recording will be available. We'll send it out to everyone who joined. It'll be on YouTube. And thanks to everyone who joined live. It was great. It's great to have you all. And thanks to Kathryn, of course, for answering all our questions. We'll post it on YouTube and we'll have, thanks. We'll add the LinkedIn there. So everyone will be able to find you. But thanks again for coming on, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.